Asterisk asterisk, Part 1, Wasteland, and Shadow asterisk asterisk. The Arizona sun hung like a molten coin in the bleached sky, casting long shadows across the dusty main street of Redemption Creek. It was the kind of August afternoon that made the air shimmer with heat, where even the flies seemed too exhausted to buzz. Theodore Theo Morgan stood in the shade of the general store's awning, rolling a cigarette between his weathered fingers, watching the crowd gather near the old auction block. He'd seen plenty of auctions in his 34 years' horses, cattle, mining claims, even the occasional piece of farm equipment. But this was different. The murmur running through the gathered townspeople had an ugly edge to it, like the growl of a rabid dog. "Step right up, gentlemen." The auctioneer, a greasy man named Cornelius Pike, waved his arms like a carnival barker. "We got ourselves a special item today, a woman who needs, shall we say, guidance and protection." Theo's jaw tightened. He'd fought in the war to end slavery, taken a Confederate musket ball to his left shoulder at Antietam. The very idea of human beings on an auction block made his stomach turn. But this was 1868, and in territories like this, the law was whatever men with guns said it was. A woman was pushed onto the platform. She wore a faded blue dress that had seen better days, and, most striking of all, a dark cloth wrapped around the lower half of her face like a bandana. Only her eyes were visible green as sagebrush after rain, fierce despite her circumstances. "Now, this here's a special case," Pike continued, his voice oily with false concern. "Found guilty of improper conduct at the Silverton boarding house. Judge figured she'd be better off under proper supervision rather than rotting in territorial prison. Bidding starts at $5. The woman Theodore noticed how she stood straight despite the rope binding her wrists, how those green eyes swept the crowd with defiance rather than fear. Most would have been broken by now, but she looked ready to fight anyone who came near. $5, shouted a man Theodore recognized as Jake Cutter, a bounty hunter with a reputation for cruelty. "I could use some company on the trail." Laughter rippled through some of the men. Theodore felt his hand drift toward the Colt at his hip. "7. Another voiced Bill Harris from the Double Bar Ranch, known for working his help into the ground. 10. Cutter again, grinning like a wolf. The woman's eyes found Theodore's in the crowd. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. There was something familiar in those eyes, something that tugged at a memory buried 3 years deep. A snowy night in Colorado Territory, a figure pulling him from beneath his dead horse after an avalanche, green eyes above a scarf. "Going once at $10. Pike's voice seemed to come from very far away. Theodore stepped out of the shadows. 50 cents. The crowd turned to stare. Pike's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. "Sir, the bid stands at 10. "I said 50 cents. Theodore's voice was quiet, but it carried the kind of weight that made smart men step back. His hand rested easy on his gun belt, and everyone there knew his reputation. Theodore Morgan had been a Union sharpshooter, could put 6 bullets through a playing card at 50 paces. "The bid is $10. Pike insisted, though sweat now beaded his forehead despite the shade. Theodore reached into his pocket and withdrew 2 quarters, tossing them onto the platform where they rang against the wood. "There's your 50 cents, unless Mr. Cutter wants to discuss the 3 wanted posters I saw in Tucson last month. Looked mighty similar to him, though the mustache was different." Cutter's face went red, then white. His hand twitched toward his gun, then thought better of it. "This ain't over, Morgan." "I never said it was." Theodore kept his eyes on Pike. "We doing business or not?" Pike looked around desperately for support, found none. Even the sheriff, old Tom Watson, suddenly seemed very interested in cleaning his fingernails. "Sold," Pike muttered. "For 50 cents. Theodore walked to the platform, ignoring the mutters and stares. Up close, he could see the woman's dress was patched in several places, could see the way her shoulders trembled slightly despite her straight posture. But those eyes, Lord, those eyes were like green fire. He pulled out his knife. Several men reached for weapons and cut the rope binding her wrists. "Can you ride?" She rubbed her wrists, studying him. When she spoke, her voice was muffled by the cloth, but clear enough. "Better than you, I'd wager." Despite everything, Theodore felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. "We'll see about that." He turned to Pike. "Papers." Pike thrust a crumpled document at him. Theodore didn't even look at it, just stuffed it in his pocket. "Come on," he said to the woman. "Let's get out of here before these vultures remember their courage." They walked through the crowd. Theodore slightly behind and to her left, hand casual but ready on his colt. The woman walked like a queen through peasants, head high, ignoring the whispers and stares. "Grace!" a woman's voice called out. Theodore saw Mrs. Paulson, the minister's wife, pushing through the crowd. "Grace, I'm sorry. I wanted to help, but Charles said—" The woman Theodore had bought stopped, turned slightly. "My name is not Grace," she said quietly. "Grace died in that boarding house. I'm Eleanor now. Eleanor Crow." "Mrs." Paulson fell back as if slapped. Theodore touched Eleanor's elbow gently. "We need to go." His horse, a steady bay gelding named Scout, waited at the hitching post alongside a smaller paint mare he'd bought that morning on instinct. Something had told him he'd need 2 horses today. "Can you mount up yourself, or do you need help?" he asked. Eleanor's eyes flashed. "I told you, I can ride." She gathered her skirts and swung up into the saddle with a grace that spoke of long practice. Theodore mounted Scout and looked back at the dispersing crowd. Cutter stood with a group of hard cases, no doubt already planning something. Sheriff Watson had disappeared entirely. Only Mrs. Paulson remained watching, her face a mixture of shame and sorrow. "Where are we going?" Eleanor asked as they rode out of town, the mountains rising blue and distant ahead of them. "Got a place up in the Ponderosas. About a day's ride. You'll be safe there." "Safe?" She said the word like she was tasting something foreign. "And what's the price for this safety?" Theodore glanced at her. "No price. I don't buy people. Miss Crow. Never have. Never will." "Then why?" "Because I pay my debts." He touched his shoulder where the old wound still ached in cold weather. "And because no one deserves to be sold like livestock." They rode in silence for a while, the town falling away behind them, the desert opening up vast and lonely. The sun was starting its descent toward the western mountains, painting the clouds in shades of rose and gold. "You don't remember me," Eleanor said finally. It wasn't a question. Theodore pulled Scout to a halt, really looking at her now. Those eyes above the cloth mask, the way she sat her horse, something about the tilt of her head. "Colorado Territory, winter of '65, the avalanche at Copper Pass." She nodded slowly. "You were half dead when I found you. Took 3 hours to dig you out, another 2 to get you to shelter. You were delirious for days, kept calling for someone named Mary." "My wife," Theodore said quietly. "She died while I was at war." "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago." He started Scout moving again. "What happened to you last I knew? You were working at the hotel in Silverton." Eleanor was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, "A man came to the boarding house. Important man, wealthy. He wanted things. When I refused, he tried to take them anyway. There was a struggle. He fell down the stairs." Her voice was steady, but Theodore heard the pain beneath it. "He broke his neck in the fall. His family had connections. The judge gave me a choice, prison or this." "Self-defense isn't murder." "Not when a woman kills a man. Not in places like this." She touched the cloth covering her face. "He marked me before he fell. Said if I wouldn't be his, I'd be nobody's. The scar makes it easy for people to believe the worst." Theodore felt a cold anger settle in his chest, the same feeling he'd had looking down his rifle scope at Confederate officers. "He's dead." 3 months now. Good. They rode on as the sun set, the desert cooling, the first coyotes beginning their evening song. Theodore led them off the main trail onto a path barely visible in the dying light, knowing Cutter would follow the main road first. "Why Eleanor Crow?" he asked eventually. "Eleanor is my grandmother's name. She came west in '49, built her own life when everyone said a woman couldn't, and Crow." She gestured at her dark hair. The cloth mask seemed fitting. "It's a good name," Theodore said. "Strong." They made camp in a box canyon as full dark fell, sheltered by high walls and a grove of cottonwoods near a small spring. Theodore saw to the horses while Eleanor gathered wood for a fire. He noticed how she moved careful, watchful, like someone who'd learned not to trust the world. Over a simple meal of beans and biscuit, Theodore told her about his place. "It's not much. Cabin I built after the war. Some corrals, a good spring. I run a few cattle. Break horses for the army sometimes. Quiet place." "And you live alone?" "Have for 6 years now." "Why help me?" she asked again. "Really?" Theodore poked at the fire with a stick, considering, "Maybe because I know what it's like to be broken by things beyond your control. Maybe because I've seen enough cruelty for one lifetime. Or maybe," he met her eyes across the fire, "maybe because when a man finds himself at death's door and someone pulls him back, he owes that person more than money can pay." Eleanor looked away. "I didn't save you expecting payment." "I know. That's why the debt matters." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. "I'll work," Eleanor said suddenly. "I can cook, clean, tend garden. I know horses and cattle. I won't be a burden." "Never said you would be." "And I'll leave as soon as I can, once things settle. Once I figure out where to go." "Stay as long as you need," Theodore said. "Leave when you're ready. Your choice, no one else's." She studied him across the fire. "You're not what I expected from a man who'd buy a woman for 50 cents. You're not what I expected from a woman who'd save a half-dead stranger in a blizzard." For the first time, he saw her eyes crinkle slightly above the mask, perhaps a smile hidden beneath. "Fair enough, Mr. Morgan." "Theodore, or Theo. The only Mr. Morgan I knew was my father, and he's been gone 15 years. Theodore, then." She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders as the desert night grew cold. "And I'm Eleanor. Just Eleanor." As the fire died to embers and they prepared for sleep, Eleanor in the shelter of the cottonwoods, Theodore with his back to a boulder where he could watch the canyon entrance, he found himself thinking about Providence. 3 years ago, this woman had given him back his life when she had no reason to help a stranger. Now, perhaps, he could give her something in return. Not her life, she was too strong to need that from anyone, but maybe a chance to heal, a place to be safe while she found her feet again. It wasn't much, but in this hard country, sometimes a little shelter from the storm was all anyone could offer. The stars wheeled overhead, bright in the clear desert air. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Cutter wouldn't give up easily. And there would be others who'd see Eleanor as property to be reclaimed. But tonight, in this small circle of light against the darkness, 2 wounded souls had found an unexpected moment of peace. Theodore settled his hat over his eyes, rifle close at hand. In the cottonwoods, he heard Eleanor shift in her blankets. "Theodore." Her voice was soft in the darkness. "Yeah. Thank you. Get some sleep," he said gruffly. "Long ride tomorrow." But as he drifted toward sleep himself, Theodore Morgan allowed himself a small smile. He'd come to town for supplies, nothing more. Instead, he'd found a chance to repay an old debt and maybe, just maybe, to remember what it felt like to not be alone. The desert night wrapped around them, vast and full of possibilities, as 2 broken people began the long journey toward something neither dared name. Not yet, but perhaps Given time and trust and the healing that only the wild country could provide, they might find their way to it together. The owl called again, and the stars kept their silent watch. And the story of Theodore Morgan and Eleanor Crow began the way all the best stories do, with two people who needed each other more than either was willing to admit. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 2, The House Among the Pines, Survival and Silence, asterisk, asterisk. The cabin appeared through the ponderosa pines like something grown from the earth itself. Log walls weathered silver gray, a stone chimney, and a pitched roof covered in wooden shingles. Eleanor reined in her paint mare, taking in the sight. After 2 days of hard riding, dodging Cutter's men at Miller's Ford, this lonely homestead felt like reaching sanctuary. "It's not much," Theodore said, dismounting Scout, "but it's solid." Eleanor slid from her saddle, legs stiff from the long ride. The cloth mask still covered her face, now dusty from the trail. "It's perfect," she said quietly, meaning it. After months of boarding houses and jail cells, the isolation felt like freedom. Theodore led the horses to a small corral, while Eleanor stood in the dooryard, absorbing the details. A vegetable garden gone to seed, a well with a peaked roof, a woodshed stacked with split pine. Everything spoke of a man living alone but not surrendering to chaos. "Come on," Theodore said, pushing open the heavy door. "Let's get you settled." The interior was Spartan but clean. One main room with a stone fireplace, a simple kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs. Eleanor noticed the 2 chairs immediately. Who did a hermit expect to feed? "Bedrooms through there." Theodore indicated a doorway. "You take it. I'll bunk out here by the fire." "I couldn't." "Not up for discussion." His tone was firm, but not unkind. "Wash basins in the corner. Spring water's clean and cold. Privy's out back, about 30 yards past the woodshed." Eleanor moved to the bedroom doorway, peered inside. A simple bed with a quilt, a dresser, pegs on the wall for clothes. On the dresser sat a small mirror, and her breath caught a woman's hairbrush. "That was Mary's," Theodore said quietly behind her. "Never could bring myself to, well, you're welcome to use it." Eleanor turned to study him, this hard man who'd faced down a town to buy her freedom for 50 cents, who could put 6 bullets through a playing card, kept his dead wife's hairbrush like a shrine. "Thank you," she said simply. The first days passed in careful routine. Eleanor woke before dawn, kindled the fire, made coffee. Theodore was always already gone, out checking his small herd of cattle or working with the half-wild horses in the far corral. They ate breakfast in near silence, communicating in nods and gestures. Eleanor threw herself into work. The vegetable garden hadn't been tended in seasons, but she found seeds in the shed and coaxed life from the soil. She mended Theodore's clothes, finding holes and tears he'd ignored. She scrubbed years of bachelor neglect from the cabin floors. "You don't have to work so hard," Theodore told her one evening, finding her hauling water from the well. "I need to," Eleanor replied, not explaining further. Work kept her hands busy and her mind from wandering to that night in Silverton, to Hamilton Prescott's hands on her throat, to the sound his neck made when she hauled another bucket. Theodore watched her for a moment, then took the rope from her hands. "Let me. You made enough dinner for 5 men. Least I can do is haul the water." It was the first time he'd touched her, however briefly, since cutting her bonds in Redemption Creek. Eleanor stepped back quickly, hating herself for flinching. "Sorry," Theodore said, though he hadn't done anything wrong. "No, Eleanor stopped, frustrated by the mask that muffled her words, by her inability to explain. "Thank you." The second week brought the first real test. Eleanor was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching. Her body went rigid, hands automatically reaching for the kitchen knife she'd taken to carrying. Theodore emerged from the barn, rifle in hand but held casual. 3 riders came through the trees, not Cutter's men, but neighbors, the Dalton brothers from the ranch to the south. Morgan, the eldest, Samuel Dalton, called out, "Heard you brought home a woman." Heard wrong. Theodore replied evenly, "I brought home a guest." The middle brother, Andrew, grinned unpleasantly. Guest who wears a mask must be some story there. Eleanor forced herself to continue hanging laundry, each movement deliberate and calm. The youngest Dalton, barely 18, stared at her openly. "Miss Crow had some trouble in town," Theodore said. "She's staying here while things settle. That's all anyone needs to know." "Crow," Samuel leaned forward in his saddle. "That the woman from Silverton, the one who defended herself." Theodore cut in, his voice dropping to a temperature that made Eleanor shiver. "Against a man who wouldn't take no for an answer. Any of you have issue with that?" The Daltons exchanged glances. Samuel shrugged. "No issue, just being neighborly." "Appreciate it. I'll be equally neighborly and mention that Miss Crow is under my protection. Anyone bothers her, they answer to me. We understanding each other." "Clear as spring water," Samuel said. He touched his hat brim. "Ma'am, welcome to the mountain." After they left, Eleanor found her hands shaking. Theodore noticed. "They won't bother you." He said, "Sam Dalton's got 3 daughters. He understands how men can be. And if they talk, if word spreads, then we deal with it." Theodore set his rifle aside. "One thing you learn up here, mountains don't care about your past, only whether you can survive winter." "Winter." Eleanor looked at the aspens already turning gold. She'd been so focused on each day. She hadn't thought about seasons changing. That night, Theodore surprised her. After dinner, instead of retreating to the barn as usual, he pulled a wooden box from beneath his bed. "Thought you might want something to do in the evenings," he said gruffly, setting it on the table. Eleanor opened it to find books, dozens of them. Shakespeare, Dickens, even some Jane Austen. Mary was a reader, Theodore explained. Said a house without books was like a body without a soul. Eleanor picked up a volume of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, running her fingers over the worn cover. "She sounds wise." "She was." Theodore stood awkwardly, as if unsure whether to stay or go. "Would you?" Eleanor hesitated. "Would you like me to read aloud?" Something shifted in Theodore's weathered face. "I'd like that." So began a new routine. Evenings by the fire. Eleanor reading while Theodore worked leather or cleaned tack. Her voice, even muffled by the mask, brought life to the little cabin. Sometimes Theodore would stop working, lost in the story. Sometimes Eleanor would glance up to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. The 3rd week brought the first snow just a dusting, but a warning of what was coming. Theodore showed Eleanor where the extra blankets were stored, how to bank the fire to last through cold nights. "You know about surviving winter?" he asked. "I grew up in Minnesota," Eleanor replied. "Before, everything." It was the most she'd shared about her past. Theodore didn't push, just nodded and showed her where he kept the emergency supplies. That night, the temperature plummeted. Eleanor woke to find her breath misting in the bedroom air. She added wood to the fireplace but couldn't get warm. Finally, wrapped in every blanket she could find, she ventured into the main room. Theodore was awake, feeding the fire. He looked up as she entered. Cold. Freezing. Her teeth chattered despite the blankets. Without a word, Theodore pulled his chair closer to the fire, gestured for her to sit. He disappeared into his makeshift bedroom area, returning with a thick buffalo robe. "This'll help," he said, draping it around her shoulders. The robe smelled of wood smoke and leather and something uniquely Theodore. Eleanor pulled it tight, feeling warmth for the first time in hours. "Thank you." Theodore added another log to the fire. First rule of mountain living, never be too proud to admit you're cold. They sat in companionable silence, watching the flames. Finally, Eleanor found courage to ask what she'd wondered for weeks. Why 2 chairs? Theodore was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, habit, I suppose, keep thinking she'll walk through that door, angry at me for burning the biscuits or forgetting to wipe my boots. How long were you married? 3 years. Met her in Missouri before the war. Her father said I wasn't good enough, no money, no prospects. But Mary... He smiled at the memory. Mary said she'd rather have love in a small cabin than loneliness in a mansion. Eleanor thought of Hamilton Prescott's fancy house in Silverton, of what he'd tried to take from her. She was right. Yeah, Theodore poked at the fire. Yeah, she was. The next morning brought 6 inches of snow and a revelation. Eleanor, making breakfast, reached for something on a high shelf and gasped in pain. The quick movement had pulled at barely healed injuries she'd kept hidden. What's wrong? Theodore was beside her immediately. Nothing, But the room spun, and Eleanor found herself gripping the table. Theodore's hands were gentle but insistent, sitting her down, checking for fever. His fingers found the edge of a bandage beneath her collar. You're hurt. It wasn't a question. Eleanor pulled away. It's healing. Let me see. No. Eleanor. His use of her name made her look up. I've seen plenty of wounds. Let me help. Slowly, reluctantly, Eleanor loosened her collar. Theodore's face went very still as he saw the bruises, the half-healed cuts from Prescott's rings. This is from him, Theodore said quietly. The man in Silverton. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. Theodore fetched his medical supplies items left from the war. His hands were infinitely gentle as he cleaned and rebandaged the wounds. There are more, Eleanor said quietly. But I can tend them. I know. Theodore's jaw was tight. I'm glad he's dead. So am I. The words came out fierce, surprising her. Theodore finished his work, stepped back. You're the strongest woman I've ever met. Eleanor laughed bitterly. Strong, I hide behind a mask. I flinch when men come near. I wake up screaming. You survived. Theodore interrupted. You fought back. You got up every day since and kept going. That's strength. Eleanor felt tears behind her eyes. I don't feel strong. Feelings got nothing to do with it. Theodore put away the medical supplies. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what needs doing anyway. That night, the wind howled around the cabin like a living thing. Eleanor lay in bed, listening to the storm. When she heard it, Theodore talking in his sleep, calling Mary's name. She rose, moved quietly to the doorway. Theodore thrashed in his bedroll by the fire, caught in some nightmare, without thinking. Eleanor knelt beside him, touched his shoulder. Theodore, wake up, you're dreaming. His eyes opened, wild and unfocused. For a moment, he didn't seem to recognize her. Then clarity returned. Eleanor, sorry, Don't apologize. She stayed where she was, hand still on his shoulder. We all have ghosts. Theodore sat up, running hands through his hair. Gets worse in winter. Don't know why. Because winter's when we have time to remember, Eleanor said softly. They looked at each other in the firelight. Theodore reached up, his fingers barely brushing the edge of her mask. Why do you still wear it here, where it's just us? Eleanor pulled back. Because underneath, I'm not who you think I am. I'm scarred, ruined. We're all scarred, Theodore said. Some just show more than others. Eleanor stood abruptly. I should go back to bed. Eleanor. His voice stopped her. That night in Colorado, when you found me, I was ready to die. Wanted to, even. Mary was gone. The war had taken everything good in me. But you wouldn't let me go. Sat with me 3 days, spooning broth into me, talking even when I couldn't answer. You were delirious. You probably don't remember. I remember your voice, Theodore said, telling me stories about your grandmother, Eleanor, about how she came west with nothing but determination, about how giving up was the only real failure. He met her eyes. You saved more than my life that night. Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she'd built brick by careful brick. That was before you became a survivor. Theodore finished. Nothing that man did to you changes who you are. Not to me. Eleanor fled to her room, Theodore's words echoing in her mind. Through the thin wall, she heard him settling back into his bedroll, heard the fire crackling, heard the wind slowly dying outside. She touched the mask covering her face, thought about scars and shame and the strange comfort of this rough cabin in the mountains, thought about a man who kept 2 chairs at his table and his dead wife's hairbrush on a dresser, who could kill without blinking but touched her wounds like she was made of spun glass. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white. But inside the cabin, 2 damaged souls were learning the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the only way to heal is to let someone else see your wounds. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In her narrow bed, Eleanor touched the mask again, and for the first time since Silverton, wondered what it might feel like to let it fall. Not yet, but maybe, given time and trust and the patient kindness of a man who understood scars, maybe someday. The mountain winter was coming, promising months of isolation and proximity. Eleanor pulled the buffalo robe closer, breathing in the scent of leather and wood smoke, and realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. In the main room, Theodore lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering green eyes in a blizzard, and wondering if saving someone else might be the key to saving himself. The cabin settled around them, logs contracting in the cold, and 2 chairs waited at the table for morning to come again. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 3, The Secret in the Scar, Confession in the Snowstorm. Asterisk, asterisk. The blizzard hit without warning on a December afternoon. Eleanor had been in the root cellar when the temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many minutes. By the time she emerged, arms full of preserves, the world had turned white and howling. Theodore burst through the door moments later, covered in snow. Storm's a bad one. Need to get the stock secured. Without hesitation, Eleanor set down the jars and reached for her coat. I'll help. No, stay inside where it's... Theodore Morgan. I have survived Minnesota winters that would freeze your Texas blood solid. I'm helping. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps approval. All right, take the rope from the porch. We tie it between the house and barn so we don't get lost. They worked together in the screaming wind, Eleanor holding the rope while Theodore secured it to the barn door. The horses were wild-eyed with fear, and it took both of them to calm the animals and ensure they had enough feed and water. The cattle, Eleanor shouted over the wind. In the low pasture, they'll find shelter in the trees. Theodore grabbed her arm as a particularly violent gust tried to tear her away. We need to get inside. They fought their way back to the cabin, following the rope hand over hand. Eleanor's mask had frozen stiff against her face, ice crystals forming where her breath escaped. Inside, they both collapsed against the door, breathing hard. You all right? Theodore asked, already moving to stoke the fire. Eleanor nodded, but her fingers fumbled with the frozen mask. The fabric had become a shell of ice, pulling painfully at her skin. I can't, it's stuck. Here. Theodore's hands were gentle as he helped her to a chair. The ice needs to melt first. Don't force it. He brought warm water, carefully applying it to the frozen fabric. Eleanor sat rigid, aware of how close he was, of his hands working patiently to free her from the icy shroud. Almost got it, he murmured. Just a bit more there. The mask came free, and Eleanor's hand flew instinctively to cover her face, but Theodore had already turned away, granting her privacy as he tended the fire. I'll get another, Eleanor said, starting to rise. The cabin shuddered under a tremendous gust. Something crashed outside a tree falling. From the sound. Eleanor. Theodore's voice was calm but firm. We might be stuck here for days. You can't wear a frozen mask the whole time. She stayed in the chair, hand still covering the left side of her face. You don't understand. Then help me understand. He pulled the other chair closer but kept his eyes on the fire. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. Maybe it's time. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows. The fire popped and crackled. Eleanor's hand trembled against her cheek. Her name was Grace Fletcher. She began quietly. That was me, before Grace Fletcher from St. Paul, who thought she could make a new life in the territories. Theodore added another log to the fire, saying nothing. I'd worked as a governess back east, saved every penny. When I heard about opportunities in Colorado, respectable work for women in the growing towns, I thought... She laughed bitterly. I thought it would be an adventure. The Silverton boarding house. Mrs. Morrison's boarding house for reputable ladies. Eleanor's voice dripped irony. It was reputable. Mostly. We served meals to minors, kept rooms clean, nothing improper. Mrs. Morrison was strict about that, until Hamilton Prescott arrived. Theodore's shoulders tensed at the name, but he remained silent. He owned silver mines, had connections to the territorial government, wealthy, powerful, used to getting what he wanted. Eleanor's free hand clenched in her lap. He decided he wanted me. The wind shrieked around the cabin corners. Eleanor continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. At first, it was flowers, gifts I returned, invitations I declined. Mrs. Morrison told me I was a fool a man like that could set me up for life. But something in his eyes... She shuddered. He looked at me like I was a thing to be possessed. When did it change? Theodore asked quietly. The night of November 3rd. The date came out sharp, branded in memory. Mrs. Morrison was away. The other girls were at the autumn dance. I stayed to tend a sick boarder, old Mr. Garrett, who had lung fever. Eleanor's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Prescott came to my room. He'd been drinking, said he was tired of playing games, that I'd let him on long enough. I tried to leave, but he grabbed me, pushed me against the wall. Her hand pressed harder against her face. I fought, screamed, but the house was empty except for Mr. Garrett, who was too ill to help. Prescott hit me again and again, said if I wouldn't be his willing, I'd be his anyway. Theodore's knuckles were white where he gripped the poker, but his voice remained gentle. You don't have to... Yes, I do. Eleanor drew a shaking breath. I reached for anything, found the letter opener on my desk. When he came at me again, I stabbed him in the shoulder. It wasn't deep, but he stumbled back, cursing. That's when he grabbed the writing crop from my dresser. She touched her covered cheek. The first strike split my face open from temple to jaw, blood in my eyes. Couldn't see. He raised it again, and I pushed him. Hard as I could. He was drunk, off balance from the shoulder wound. He fell backward, hit the stairs. The fall that broke his neck, Theodore finished. Eleanor nodded. I heard it snap. Such a small sound for such a large thing. He lay at the bottom of the stairs, eyes open, neck at an impossible angle. And all I could think was that I was glad. Glad he was dead. Glad he'd never touch another woman. Good, Theodore said fiercely. Any man who'd do that. But that's not how the law saw it. Eleanor's voice turned bitter again. Hamilton Prescott, respected businessman, killed by a boarding house girl who'd clearly been leading him on. The letter opener in his shoulder proved I'd attacked first, they said. Never mind my face, my torn dress, the bruises on my throat. I was lucky to get a choice between prison and being sold. The storm raged on. Theodore set down the poker, turned to face her fully. Show me. Eleanor's breath caught. Theodore? You've carried this alone long enough. Show me. Slowly, like ice melting in spring. Eleanor lowered her hand. The scar ran from her left temple down across her cheek to her jaw. A raised red line that pulled slightly at her skin. It was still healing. Would always be visible. But it was just a scar, not the monster she'd built it into in her mind. Theodore studied her face with the same calm attention he'd give to reading sign on the trail. Then he stood, crossed to her chair, and knelt beside it. Eleanor Crow, he said softly. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Don't, tears spilled down her cheeks. Don't lie to make me feel better. I don't lie. His hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers ghosted over the scar, barely touching. This mark, this is proof of your courage, proof you fought, proof you survived. Eleanor sobbed then, months of held-back tears breaking free like the storm outside. Theodore gathered her against his chest, holding her while she cried for Grace Fletcher, who'd died in that boarding house. For the innocence lost. For the mark that would forever remind her of that night. I see him every time I look in the mirror, she whispered against Theodore's shirt. See his face. Feel the crop coming down. Then we'll change what you see. Theodore pulled back enough to meet her eyes. Every time you see that scar, remember instead that you're alive and he's not. Remember that you fought for your honor and won. Remember that you're here, free, with someone who sees you truly. Eleanor searched his weathered face. How can you look at me and not see? I see a woman who saved my life in a blizzard, who works herself to exhaustion to prove she's worth kindness, who reads to me by firelight and makes the best biscuits I've ever tasted. His thumb traced her unmarred cheek. I see Eleanor Crow, who's too stubborn to die and too strong to break. The wind chose that moment to rattle the windows violently. They both looked toward the sound, then back at each other, and somehow found themselves laughing sharp. Slightly hysterical laughter at the absurdity of bearing souls while the world tried to blow itself apart outside. We should check the shutters, Eleanor said, wiping her eyes. They'll hold. Theodore stood, helped her to her feet, built them to last through worse than this. They stood close in the firelight, the storm a living wall around their small shelter. Eleanor touched her exposed scar self-consciously. It's strange, she said, not hiding. Takes practice. Theodore touched his shoulder where the old war wound ached, being seen true scars and all. Eleanor looked up at him, this man who'd bought her freedom for 50 cents and asked nothing in return, who kept his dead wife's hairbrush but made space for the living, who saw her scar and called her beautiful. Theodore, she whispered. That phrase you said, back at the creek, about staying forever. His hand found hers, engulfed it in warmth and calluses. Meant every word. But Eleanor, I'm not him, not any of them. You say stop, I stop. You say go, I go. You're free here, always. I know. And she did know, bone deep. That's why I can say this. She pressed his hand to her scarred cheek. Touch me there. I'm yours. Theodore's breath caught. His thumb traced the scar again, reverent as prayer. Careful, angel, he whispered, echoing words from weeks ago. Once I'm yours, I stay forever. I'm counting on it. The kiss was inevitable as sunrise soft, careful, full of promise. When they parted, Eleanor was crying again, but these were different tears. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to be with someone after, we'll learn together. Theodore pressed his forehead to hers. No hurry, no expectations, just this They stood together while the blizzard raged, two people marked by loss and violence. Finding in each other, not healing for their wounds, some things never fully heal but something better. Acceptance, understanding, the radical act of being seen and not turning away. Later, they prepared for the long storm together. Theodore taught Eleanor how to read the wood pile, to know how many days of heat remained. Eleanor showed Theodore her grandmother's trick for making hardtack taste almost good. They moved around each other with new awareness, hands brushing as they passed, eyes meeting across the room with heat that had nothing to do with the fire. When night fell, the storm still howling, Theodore made his usual move toward his bedroll by the fire. "Stay," Eleanor said softly. He turned, uncertain. "Eleanor, not for just stay. I don't want to be alone tonight." So Theodore carried his bedroll to her room, laid it on the floor beside her bed. In the darkness, Eleanor's hand found his, held tight. "Tell me about Mary," she said. "Tell me about being happy." Theodore talked then, his voice mixing with the wind, about meeting Mary at a church social, her laugh that filled rooms, her terrible singing that he loved anyway, about building this cabin together, their plans for children, the garden she'd started that Eleanor now tended. "She would have liked you," he said finally, "would have admired your strength." "I would have liked her too." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Theodore, I'm glad she loved you first. Glad you know how to be gentle." They fell asleep that way, hands linked across the space between bed and floor, while outside the storm spent its fury on the uncaring mountains. The scar on Eleanor's face caught the faint firelight from the main room, but for the first time since that November night, she didn't feel its weight. In the morning, they would wake to a world transformed by snow, would dig out together and face whatever came next. But tonight, in this small, warm space carved from winter's violence, two souls had found the courage to show their wounds and discover that love could grow even in scarred ground. The wind sang its wild song, and the fire crackled its ancient rhythm, and Grace Fletcher's ghost finally began to rest as Eleanor Crowe claimed her survival as strength, her scar as a badge of honor, and her heart as her own to give. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 4, Fire and Trial, The Shadow of Society. Asterisk, asterisk. The stranger appeared on a February morning when the world glittered with fresh snow. Eleanor saw him first from the kitchen window, a lone rider picking his way up the mountain trail, his horse's breath steaming in the cold air. "Theodore," she called quietly, her hand instinctively moving to the rifle they kept by the door. Theodore emerged from the barn, took in the situation with a glance. His own hand dropped casual-like to his holster. "Stay inside." But Eleanor had learned to read Theodore's moods in their months together, saw the tension in his shoulders. "You know him." "Josiah Cutter, bounty hunter." Theodore's jaw tightened. "The one from the auction." Eleanor's blood chilled, but she lifted her chin. "I'm not hiding." "Eleanor." "No." She stepped onto the porch beside him, no mask covering her scar. "I'm done running from men like him." Cutter reined up just outside comfortable shooting distance, a professional's caution. He'd added a thick mustache since Redemption Creek, but the wolf's grin remained the same. "Morning, Morgan." His eyes slid to Eleanor, lingered on her scar with satisfaction. "Miss Fletcher, or should I say, Miss Crowe." "State your business." "Cutter," Theodore said evenly. "Just passing through. Thought I'd be neighborly. Share some news from town." Cutter shifted in his saddle, coat falling open to reveal the badge pinned to his vest. "Seems I've gone legitimate. Deputy Sheriff of Redemption Creek, duly sworn and everything." Eleanor felt Theodore stiffen beside her. A bounty hunter with a badge was twice as dangerous as one without. "Congratulations," Theodore said dryly. "Now get off my land." Now. That's no way to talk to a lawman." Cutter's grin widened. especially one who's been hearing interesting stories. Seems there's questions about what really happened in Silverton. New witness came forward. What witness? Eleanor demanded, stepping forward despite Theodore's warning touch. Man named William Prescott, the deceased's cousin. Cutter pulled a folded paper from his coat. Says he's got evidence his cousin was murdered in cold blood, offering a substantial reward for the killer's capture. That's a lie, Eleanor said flatly. Hamilton Prescott attacked me. It was self-defense. Maybe so, but a rich man's word against a boarding house girl's. Cutter shrugged. Judge might see it different this time. Course, we could avoid all that unpleasantness. Theodore's voice dropped to Arctic temperatures. What are you suggesting? Well, bringing in a dangerous fugitive is risky work. Man could get hurt, but if said fugitive was to be grateful for a lawman's discretion. Cutter's eyes roamed over Eleanor in a way that made her skin crawl. I'm sure we could work something out. The shot came so fast Eleanor barely saw Theodore draw. Cutter's hat flew off his head. A neat hole punched through the crown. Next one's lower, Theodore said conversationally. Get off my land. Don't come back. Cutter's face had gone white, then red with rage. You just threatened a deputy sheriff. I just warned a trespasser. You want to make something of it? We can ride to the federal marshal in Denver. Explain how you're using your badge to extort women. Theodore's hand remained rock steady on his gun. Your choice. For a long moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Cutter grabbed his ruined hat, jammed it on his head. This isn't over. Morgan, you can't protect her forever. Watch me. Cutter wheeled his horse, spurred it brutally back down the trail. They watched until he disappeared into the trees. He'll be back, Eleanor said quietly. Yes. Theodore holstered his gun. With friends, most likely. I should leave. If you go, he wins. Theodore turned to face her. Men like Cutter, like Prescott, they count on women being alone, afraid, without protection. You run now. You'll run forever. But you shouldn't have to. Eleanor, he cupped her scarred cheek gently. I spent 4 years fighting a war for principles I believed in. You think I'd do less for the woman I love? The word hung between them, new and shining. They'd danced around it for weeks, shown it in touches and glances, but never spoken it aloud. You love me, Eleanor whispered. Have for a while now. Figure you ought to know. In case... He didn't finish, but Eleanor heard what he didn't say. In case Cutter came back with too many men. In case the law sided with money over truth. Theodore Morgan, she said fiercely, you are not allowed to die for me. We're going to fight, and we're going to win, and we're going to live to be old and gray in this cabin. You hear me? Yes, ma'am. His smile held an edge. Though we might need help. I've got an idea. That afternoon, Theodore rode to the Dalton ranch while Eleanor kept watch, rifle in hand. He returned near sunset with Samuel Dalton himself. Ma'am. Samuel touched his hat brim, his eyes taking in her uncovered scar without reaction. Theodore told me about your trouble, about what really happened in Silverton. Eleanor straightened. And I believe you. My eldest girl. Margaret, she worked in Denver before coming home, told me stories about men who think money makes them kings. Samuel's weathered face hardened. I've got no use for such men, or for lawmen who'd help them. What are you saying? Eleanor asked. I'm saying the Daltons stand with our neighbors. My boys and I will be keeping an eye on the trails. Cutter wants to come calling. He'll find the mountain less welcoming than he expects. The relief that flooded Eleanor made her knees weak. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Cutter's got the law on his side, even if it's crooked law. We need to be smarter. Samuel looked at Theodore. You still got those papers from the auction? Theodore nodded. Never looked at them close, but yes. Might be worth examining. Sometimes official documents tell interesting stories. After Samuel left, they spread the crumpled papers on the table. Eleanor forced herself to read the bill of sale that had reduced her to property. But there, in the fine print, "Theodore, look at this." Her finger traced a line of text. "The presiding judge in my case, Harrison Blackwood." "What about him?" "That name. I heard it in Silverton. Blackwood had investments in Prescott's mines. They were business partners." Theodore's eyes sharpened. A judge with financial ties to the victim's family, who stood to profit from Prescott's death being ruled murder rather than self-defense. Eleanor continued, "If it was self-defense, Prescott's estate could be liable for damages to me. But if I was convicted of murder, the estate stays clean, and Blackwood keeps his investment profits." Theodore stood, pacing. "This is big. Eleanor, this is evidence of corruption." "But who'd listen, a scarred woman's word against a judge?" "Not just your word." Theodore grabbed his coat. "I'm riding to town. There's a telegraph office." "At night, Theodore. If Cutter's watching, then I'll be careful." He kissed her quickly, fiercely. "Trust me." The longest night of Eleanor's life crawled by. She kept the fire low, rifle across her lap, starting at every sound. When dawn finally broke with no sign of Theodore, fear clawed at her throat. Then hoofbeats, multiple horses. Eleanor checked the rifle's load, positioned herself by the window. But it was Theodore who emerged from the trees, accompanied by a woman in a traveling cloak and two men Eleanor didn't recognize. "Eleanor," Theodore called. "It's all right. We have help." The woman dismounted with practiced ease, pulled back her hood to reveal steel-gray hair and sharp eyes. "Miss Crow, I'm Charlotte Morrison. I owned the boarding house in Silverton." Eleanor's breath caught. "Mrs. Morrison. But how?" "Your man sent a telegram last night. I've been traveling since I received it." The older woman's face was grim. "I should have come forward months ago. I was afraid Prescott's family threatened me if I spoke the truth. But when I heard Cutter was using a badge to hunt you..." She shook her head. "Enough is enough." One of the men stepped forward. "James Patterson, federal marshal out of Denver. Mrs. Morrison's told me quite a story. Miss Crow, I'd like to hear your version." For the next hour, Eleanor told everything about Prescott's pursuit, the attack, the fight, the fall, about Judge Blackwood's hasty trial, the choice between prison and auction. Charlotte Morrison confirmed every detail, adding her own observations about Prescott's behavior toward her girls. "He was a predator," Charlotte said bluntly. "Used his money and position to take what he wanted. Eleanor wasn't the first he'd cornered, just the first to fight back successfully." Marshal Patterson took notes, his face grave. "This Blackwood, he's still a sitting judge." "Far as I know," Theodore said. "Not for long. Judicial corruption's a federal matter." Patterson looked at Eleanor. "Ma'am, what happened to you was wrong on every level. Can't undo it, but I can sure as hell make it right going forward." "What about Cutter?" Eleanor asked. Patterson's smile was cold. "Deputy Cutter's about to learn his badge doesn't make him above the law. Where might I find him?" As if in answer, hoofbeats thundered up the trail. Cutter appeared with 4 hard-looking men, all armed. They pulled up short at the sight of the federal marshal's presence. "Morning, Deputy," Patterson called out pleasantly. "James Patterson, federal marshal. I hear you've been conducting some interesting business in these parts." Cutter's face cycled through several expressions before settling on bravado. "Just doing my job. Marshal, this woman's a fugitive." "This woman's a victim of judicial corruption and attempted extortion," Patterson corrected. "Which you'd know if you'd done actual law work instead of hunting bounties in a badge." "You can't prove." "Actually, I can." Charlotte Morrison stepped forward. I kept records. Deputy Cutter. Every threat Prescott made, every girl he bothered, every time men like you looked the other way because he paid well. Would you like me to share those records with the marshal? The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. One of Cutter's men muttered something and turned his horse around, deciding the odds weren't to his liking. The others followed, leaving Cutter alone. Smart men, Patterson observed. How about you? Deputy, you feeling smart today? Cutter's hand twitched toward his gun. 3 weapons cleared leather before he could blink Theodore's, Patterson's, and, surprisingly, Charlotte Morrison's. I really wouldn't, Charlotte said sweetly, a pearl-handled derringer steady in her hand. I've run a boarding house in mining towns for 20 years. You learn to discourage unwanted guests. Cutter raised his hand slowly. This is a mistake. You don't know who you're crossing. William Prescott, Patterson asked. Already sent a wire to Denver about him. Seems he's wanted for claim jumping in California. Doubt he'll be troubling Miss Crow anymore. The fight went out of Cutter like air from a punctured bellows. Patterson moved forward, plucked the deputy's badge from his vest. You're done here. If I see you within 100 miles of Miss Crow again, I'll arrest you for harassment, extortion, and impersonating a lawman because this badge was never legally issued. Patterson pocketed the tin star. Get gone, and be grateful I'm feeling merciful. Cutter fled, spurring his horse viciously down the mountain. They watched until he vanished into the distance. He won't stay gone, Theodore said quietly. No, Patterson agreed. Men like that nurse grudges, but he'll think twice about coming at you legal-like. He turned to Eleanor. Miss Crow, I'll be filing a report that clears your name completely. Self-defense. Clear as day. I'll also be investigating Judge Blackwood and the Silverton Court. You have my word your record will be clean. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know how to thank you. Live well, Patterson said simply. That's thanks enough. As the marshal prepared to leave, Charlotte Morrison approached Eleanor. I owe you an apology. I should have protected you better, spoken up sooner. You were afraid, Eleanor said. I understand fear. Charlotte studied Eleanor's uncovered scar, the way she stood tall beside Theodore. You've grown strong, Eleanor Crow, stronger than I ever was. I had help. Eleanor took Theodore's hand, squeezed it. Charlotte smiled. The best kind of strength, the kind that knows when to stand alone and when to accept support. She mounted her horse. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me. After the visitors left, Eleanor and Theodore stood on their porch, watching the sun climb over the mountains. The threat wasn't entirely gone. Cutter might return. Other troubles might come. But for now, they had this moment of victory. You did it, Eleanor said wonderingly. You actually did it. We did it, Theodore corrected. Together. Eleanor turned in his arms, pulled his head down for a kiss that tasted of gratitude and promise. I love you, Theodore Morgan, in case you needed to hear it too. Always need to hear it. He held her close. What now? Eleanor considered. The shadow of her past was lifting, but scars inside and out remained. Yet, standing here, in the clean mountain air, with a good man's arms around her and the law finally on her side, she felt something she hadn't experienced since that night in Silverton possibility. Now, she said, we live, really live, not just survive, not just hide, but build something real. Together. Together. That night, they celebrated quietly a special dinner, stories by the fire, the deep peace of safety after fear. Eleanor left off not just her mask, but the weight she'd carried since Silverton. When Cutter's shadow crossed her mind, she pushed it away. He was just a man, and she'd faced worse. Theodore watched her across the table, this woman who'd transformed from a frightened girl at an auction to a force of nature. Penny for your thoughts. Just thinking how far we've come since you bought me for 50 cents. Best investment I ever made, Theodore said seriously, then grinned. Though technically, I didn't buy you. I bought the right to tell them all to go to hell. Eleanor laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. The sound filled the cabin like spring water, washing away the last shadows of winter. Outside, the mountains stood eternal guard. Inside, two people who'd learned the cost of standing up to power raised their cups in a toast to justice, delayed but not denied, to love found in unlikely places, and to the truth that sometimes, with courage and allies and unshakable determination, even the powerless could win. The fire burned bright against the darkness, and Eleanor Crow faced her future with her scars uncovered and her heart unafraid, knowing that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 5, The Plan with the Veil, A Trap for the Hunter. Asterisk, asterisk. March came to the mountains with false promises of spring warm days that melted snow, followed by freezing nights that turned the world to ice. Eleanor stood at the kitchen window, watching Theodore repair fence posts in the lower pasture. 3 weeks had passed since Marshal Patterson's visit. 3 weeks of quiet that felt like holding a breath. "He's out there," she said to the empty room. "I can feel him watching." She was right. That afternoon, Samuel Dalton rode up with troubling news. "My boy Andrew saw tracks near Miller's Ridge," Samuel reported, accepting coffee from Eleanor. "Boot prints, horse sign, remains of a campfire. Someone's been watching your place." Theodore's jaw tightened. "Cutter." "Most likely, man's been spotted in the territory, keeping just out of reach, like a wolf circling sheep." "We're no sheep," Eleanor said firmly. Samuel studied her with approval. "No, ma'am, you're not, but wolves are patient. He's waiting for something." That night, Eleanor couldn't settle. She paced the cabin, checked windows, started at every sound. Finally, Theodore caught her hands, stilled her restless movement. "We can't live like this," he said. "Always waiting, always watching." "Then what do we do?" Eleanor sank into a chair, thinking. Cutter wanted her as bounty, as revenge for his humiliation, as proof he couldn't be bested. He'd wait forever if need be. A shadow poisoning their peace. What if, she spoke slowly, an idea forming. What if we give him what he wants? Theodore's expression darkened. "Eleanor." "Not me," she clarified quickly. "The image of me. The woman in the mask he's been hunting." She stood, energy crackling through her. "Theodore, he's never really seen me. At the auction, during his visit I was always masked. He knows about the scar. But he's never seen my full face. So we use that," Eleanor's mind raced. "Set a trap. Give him the masked woman he expects. Lead him where we want him." Theodore considered this. "It's dangerous." "So is doing nothing?" Eleanor gripped his hands. "I'm tired of being hunted. It's time I became the hunter." They spent days planning, mapping the territory, identifying the perfect location. Theodore rode to town, returning with supplies and information. Cutter had been seen in saloons, drinking heavily, boasting about unfinished business. He'd gathered a few hard cases around him, not many, but enough to be dangerous. The spot they chose was Saxon's Canyon, a narrow defile 5 miles from the cabin. Only one way in or out, with high walls perfect for ambush. Theodore positioned rifles at key points, cached ammunition, planned every angle. "You don't have to do this," he told Eleanor the night before. "We could leave, start fresh somewhere else." Eleanor donned her old mask, adjusting it in the mirror. "I've been Eleanor Crow the runaway long enough. Time to be Eleanor Crow the fighter." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Eleanor dressed carefully, her old blue dress from the auction, the dark mask, her grandmother's shawl around her shoulders. She looked like the frightened woman Cutter expected to find. Theodore kissed her fiercely before they parted. "You remember the signals? 3 shots means abort. 2 means you're in position. 1 means trouble." Eleanor touched his face. "I'll be careful." "You better be." Eleanor rode out alone, taking the old mining road that led past Saxon's Canyon. She made no effort to hide, knowing Cutter's watchers would spot her. Sure enough, within an hour, she glimpsed movement in the trees behind riders following at a distance. She led them on a careful dance, staying visible but out of reach, drawing them toward the canyon. Her heart hammered, but her hands stayed steady on the reins. This was her choice, her plan. For the first time since Silverton, she held the power. The canyon mouth appeared ahead. Eleanor slowed, as if her horse had picked up a stone. She dismounted, made a show of checking the hoof, all the while listening for Theodore's signal. 2 shots echoed off the canyon walls. He was in position. Well, Eleanor Crow, all alone. She spun to find Cutter emerging from the trees, flanked by 3 men. He'd circled around, coming from an unexpected direction. Eleanor's blood chilled, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Deputy Cutter," she said, letting fear creep into her voice. "What do you want?" "Former deputy, thanks to you." Cutter dismounted, hand resting on his gun. "Cost me my badge, my reputation. Figure you owe me." "I owe you nothing." "See, that's where you're wrong." Cutter stepped closer. "Hamilton Prescott was a friend of mine. Good man, generous with his money. You killed him. He attacked me." "So you say." Cutter was close enough now that Eleanor could smell the whiskey on him. "But dead men don't talk. Do they just leave their money behind for smart folks to claim?" Understanding dawned. "You were blackmailing him. That's why you want me so badly I cost you income." Cutter's grin was ugly. "Prescott paid well to keep certain appetites. Quiet. With him gone, that income dried up. Figure you should compensate me for the loss." "I have no money." "Maybe not, but you're worth something to the right people. There's men who'd pay well for a woman already broken in." Eleanor's hand moved toward the knife at her belt, but one of Cutter's men had circled behind her. Rough hands seized her arms, and she cried out partly in real distress, partly to signal Theodore. "That's better," Cutter said, reaching for her mask. "Let's see what all the fuss is about." Eleanor twisted away. "No." "Shy little thing, aren't you?" Cutter laughed. "Boys, take her to the canyon. We'll conduct our business there, away from prying eyes." They forced her toward Saxon's Canyon, exactly where she'd planned to go, but not how she'd intended. Eleanor's mind raced. Theodore was positioned high on the canyon walls. He couldn't fire without risking hitting her. Inside the canyon, Cutter's confidence grew. Perfect spot. Nobody around for miles. He approached Eleanor again. "Now, about that mask." This time, Eleanor didn't fight as he reached for it. Instead, she met his eyes steadily. "You want to see fine, but you might not like what you find." She pulled off the mask herself, revealing not just the scar, but a face transformed by months of healing, strength, and love. She wasn't the broken girl from the auction anymore. Cutter stepped back, momentarily nonplussed. "You're different." "I'm free," Eleanor said simply, "something you'll never understand." Cutter's face darkened. "Free, you're about to learn different." He nodded to his men. "Tie her up. We'll—" The shot came from above. So close to Cutter's head he felt the wind. Theodore's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "Next one doesn't miss." Cutter spun, searching the rimrock. "Morgan should have known you'd be skulking about." "Let her go. Cutter, this is between you and me now." "Is it?" Cutter grabbed Eleanor, used her as a shield. "Show yourself." or I put a bullet in her. Eleanor felt the cold metal of Cutter's gun against her temple. But instead of fear, she felt a strange calm. She'd faced death before, survived it, and she wasn't the same frightened woman who'd cowered in a Silverton boarding house. "Theodore," she called out clearly, "remember what you taught me about hunting." There was a pause, then understanding in Theodore's voice. "Always have a backup plan." Eleanor smiled. Then she did exactly what Theodore had taught her, went completely limp, dropping her full weight without warning. Cutter, unprepared, stumbled forward, his gun swinging wide. The canyon erupted. Not just Theodore's rifle, but others, Samuel Dalton and his boys. Positioned exactly where Eleanor had suggested. They'd been the backup plan all along, moving into place while Eleanor led Cutter on his chase. Cutter's men, caught in a crossfire, threw down their weapons immediately. But Cutter himself, driven by rage and whiskey, tried to bring his gun back to Eleanor. Theodore's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. A second shot, from Samuel, knocked the gun from his hand. Cutter fell to his knees, clutching his bleeding shoulder, cursing viciously. Eleanor stood slowly, brushing dust from her dress. She walked to where Cutter knelt and looked down at him with something almost like pity. "You could have just left us alone," she said quietly. "Built a real life somewhere, been a real lawman, but you chose this." "You ruined everything," Cutter gasped. "You and your kind, thinking you're better than—" "No," Eleanor interrupted. "I never thought I was better. I just thought I was human, deserving of dignity, of choice, of freedom. That's what men like you and Prescott could never accept." Theodore climbed down from the rocks, rifle trained on Cutter. The Dalton men secured the other prisoners, Andrew grinning at the successful ambush. "A nice work with the drop," Theodore told Eleanor. "Practiced that move well." "I had a good teacher." Eleanor picked up her discarded mask, looked at it thoughtfully. This piece of cloth had hidden her for months, been both prison and protection. Now, she walked to where a small fire smoldered one of Cutter's men had been smoking. Without ceremony, she dropped the mask into the flames. The fabric caught quickly, smoke rising into the clear mountain air. "No more hiding," she said, watching it burn, "from anyone." Samuel Dalton approached, studying the scene. "What do we do with them?" "Take them to the federal marshal in Denver." Theodore said, "Let real law deal with them." "No," Cutter struggled against his bonds. "You can't. I know people." "So do we," Eleanor said calmly. "Marshal Patterson will be very interested to hear how you've been spending your time since he revoked your badge." As the Daltons prepared to transport the prisoners, Eleanor found herself alone with Theodore for a moment. He touched her face gently, fingers tracing where the mask had been. "You all right?" "Better than all right." Eleanor leaned into his touch. "I'm done being afraid. Theodore, done letting the past chain me." "Good." He kissed her forehead. "Though I have to admit, that was terrifying. When he had that gun to your head." "But you trusted me, trusted the plan, trusted my strength." Eleanor smiled. "That means everything." They returned to the cabin as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The evening felt different, somehow lighter, cleaner, as if burning the mask had cleared more than just cloth from their lives. That night, Eleanor stood before the mirror in her room, really looking at herself for the first time in months. The scar was still there, would always be there, but it no longer defined her. She was Eleanor Crow survivor, fighter, woman loved and loving. Theodore appeared in the doorway. "Penny, for your thoughts." "Just thinking about masks." Eleanor said, "How we all wear them, one way or another. Hide our scars, our fears, our true selves." "Some masks protect us," Theodore offered. "Yes, but some imprison us." Eleanor turned to face him. I wore that mask because I thought it hid my shame, but really, it hid my strength. Every time I covered my face, I agreed with everyone who said I should be ashamed. Theodore crossed to her, framed her face with his hands. Nothing about you has ever been shameful. Not your scar, not your fight, not your survival. I know that now. Eleanor covered his hands with hers. Thanks to you. Not me. You did this. I just stood guard while you found your way. They stood together in the lamplight. Two people who'd learned that sometimes the greatest courage was in being seen scars, flaws, and all. Outside, the mountains stood eternal, indifferent to human struggles. But inside this small cabin, love had built a fortress stronger than stone. Later, as they sat by the fire planning spring planting, Eleanor found herself laughing at something Theodore said about his terrible gardening skills. The sound still surprised her, sometimes joy bubbling up where once only fear had lived. What? Theodore asked, smiling at her mirth. Just us 6 months ago. I was sure I'd never feel safe again, never laugh again, never be able to be myself with anyone. Eleanor reached for his hand. You gave me back my life. No, Theodore corrected gently. You took it back. I just made sure you had space to do it. Eleanor squeezed his hand, thinking about the journey from that auction platform to this moment, about masks burned and traps sprung, about choosing to be the hunter instead of the hunted, about the power in standing your ground and saying, no more. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Word of Cutter's capture would spread. There might be others who'd test their resolve, but tonight, Eleanor Crow sat maskless and unafraid, planning a future she'd once thought impossible. The fire crackled its ancient song, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. But there were no more shadows at the windows, no more wolves circling their door. Just peace, hard-won and precious, and the knowledge that whatever came next, they'd face it together honest, visible, and free. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 6. Justice Rewritten. The Testimony of the Silent asterisk, asterisk. April arrived with thunderstorms that washed the mountains clean. Eleanor stood on the porch, watching lightning fork across the sky, when she saw the rider approaching through the rain. Not a threat this time, the horse moved too slowly. The rider hunched against the weather like someone seeking shelter. Not trouble. Theodore, she called. Someone's coming. Theodore emerged from the barn, rifle in hand but lowered. They waited as the rider drew closer, finally recognizing the slight figure beneath the soaked traveling cloak. That's a woman, Eleanor said, surprised. The rider reached their gate, pushed back her hood to reveal a face Eleanor knew young, pretty despite exhaustion, with the distinctive red hair plastered to her head. Harriet, Eleanor breathed. Harriet Sullivan. The girl, for she was barely 20, slumped in her saddle. Hello, Grace. Eleanor. I heard you go by Eleanor now. Theodore helped her down, and Eleanor ushered her inside. Questions burning on her tongue. Harriet Sullivan had worked at Mrs. Morrison's boarding house, had been there that terrible night. What could have brought her here? Hundreds of miles from Silverton, once dry and wrapped in blankets by the fire, sipping hot coffee with shaking hands. Harriet finally spoke. I've come to make things right, she said quietly. I've carried this too long, and I can't live with it anymore. What are you talking about? Eleanor sat across from her, heart beginning to race. Harriet met her eyes, and Eleanor saw guilt there, deep and corroding. I was there that night, not in the house I was supposed to be at the dance. But I came back early. I felt sick, wanted my bed. Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. You never said... I know. Tears rolled down Harriet's cheeks. I was on the back stairs when I heard the struggle. Heard you screaming, heard him. What he said. I saw you push him. Saw him fall. The cabin seemed to shrink around them. Theodore placed a protective hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "I was so scared," Harriet continued. "I hid in my room until morning. When they found his body, when they arrested you, I wanted to speak up, I swear I did. But his family, they came to the boarding house, offered money for silence, made threats about what happened to girls who spoke against important men." "So you said nothing?" Eleanor's voice was flat, controlled. "I said nothing." Harriet's shoulders shook with sobs. "Watch them drag you away, call you murderer, and I said nothing. I'm so sorry. Eleanor, I'm so sorry." Eleanor stood abruptly, walked to the window. Outside, the storm continued its fury, matching the tempest in her chest. Behind her, she heard Theodore's low voice. "Why now? What changed?" Harriet's answer was muffled by tears. "I heard what happened with Cutter, how you fought back, won your freedom, and I realized I'm still trapped, still silent, still letting fear rule me." She drew a shuddering breath. "I can't undo my cowardice, but maybe I can help make it right." Eleanor turned slowly. "How?" Harriet reached into her satchel, pulled out a leather journal. "I wrote it all down. Everything I saw, heard, dates, times, details, and I've been collecting other stories. Other girls Prescott hurt, threatened, women too scared to speak alone. But together," she opened the journal, pages covered in neat handwriting, names, incidents, a pattern of abuse stretching back years. Eleanor sank back into her chair, overwhelmed. "There are 12 of us," Harriet said. 12 women willing to testify about Hamilton Prescott, about what he was really like, about why you had no choice. "Testify to whom?" Theodore asked. "The local law already cleared Eleanor." "To everyone." Harriet lifted her chin with newfound determination. "There's a newspaperman in Denver, Thomas Whitman. He's been investigating corruption in the territorial courts. He wants to write about this, about how powerful men use the law to silence women." Eleanor thought of her months of shame, of hiding behind a mask, of being sold like property, all while witnesses stayed silent. "You let them auction me," she said quietly. "Watch them put me on that platform like livestock." "Yes," Harriet didn't flinch from the accusation. "I was a coward. I own that. But Eleanor Grace, I'm here now. Ready to stand up, speak truth. If you'll let me." The storm outside began to calm, thunder growing distant. Eleanor studied the girl before her young, frightened, but finally finding courage. She thought of her own journey, the people who'd helped her, the strength found in forgiveness. "Tell me about the others," Eleanor said finally. For the next hour, Harriet detailed her quiet campaign. Letters sent in secret, meetings in back rooms, women slowly finding their voices. Mrs. Morrison had helped, provided names and addresses. The network grew, spreading across 3 territories. Prescott wasn't the only one, Harriet explained. These men, they protect each other, share information about which girls are trouble, which judges can be bought. It's bigger than just what happened to you. Theodore whistled low. "This is dangerous territory. These men won't give up their power easily." "No," Harriet agreed. "That's why we need Eleanor. You've become a symbol. The woman who fought back and won. If you stand with us, others will find courage too." Eleanor stood, paced the small cabin. Part of her wanted to refuse, to keep her hard-won peace, but she thought of other women facing Prescott's kind, other girls who might fight back if they knew they weren't alone. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Come to Denver, meet with Whitman, tell your story publicly, with your name attached." Harriet leaned forward. "Then stand with us when we present our testimonies to the territorial governor. Make them listen." "The governor?" Eleanor was startled. "You think he'll care?" "Governor Samuel Crawford is new, appointed by President Grant himself. He's already cleared out corruption in the mining commission. Word is, he's looking at the territorial courts next. Harriet's eyes blazed with hope. This could change everything. Eleanor, not just for us, but for all women in the territories. Eleanor looked at Theodore. He met her gaze steadily. It's your choice, he said. Always. But if you go, I go with you. That night, unable to sleep, Eleanor found herself reading Harriet's journal by lamplight. Page after page of pain, of women terrorized into silence, but also courage, small acts of resistance, women helping each other survive. One entry stopped her cold. Margaret Dalton, neighbor's daughter, worked Denver hotels before returning home. Attacked by Prescott associate William Thornton, fought him off with fireplace poker. Family paid for silence. She never reported, but burns with fury still. Asterisk. Margaret Dalton, Samuel's eldest daughter. Eleanor thought of the man who'd helped trap Cutter, who'd stood by them. His daughter carried similar scars, hidden beneath propriety. By morning, Eleanor had decided, "We'll go," she told Harriet over breakfast. "But we do this my way. No hiding, no shame. If we're going to speak truth, we speak it full-voiced." Harriet nodded eagerly. "The others will be so grateful." "I'm not doing it for gratitude." Eleanor's tone was firm. "I'm doing it because silence is what let men like Prescott flourish. Because every woman who stays quiet makes it easier for the next predator." They spent a week preparing. Theodore arranged for the Daltons to watch the homestead. Eleanor practiced telling her story without flinching, each telling making it easier. Harriet sent telegrams, coordinating arrivals in Denver. The night before departure, Margaret Dalton visited. Eleanor had sent word, uncertain of reception, but Margaret arrived with steel in her spine and gratitude in her eyes. "I heard what you're doing," she said without preamble. "I want to help." They talked late into the night, two women sharing scars, visible and hidden. Margaret agreed to testify about Thornton, about the culture of silence that protected such men. "My father thinks I came home because I missed the mountains," Margaret said wryly. "Truth is, I came home because here, I could shoot any man who tried to touch me, and folks would understand. Maybe after this, women won't need to flee to the mountains for safety." Eleanor offered. "Maybe," Margaret squeezed her hand. "Thank you for being brave first. Makes it easier for the rest of us." The journey to Denver took 3 days. Eleanor rode with her head high. No mask, scar visible to any who looked. Theodore flanked her, protective but not possessive. Harriet chattered nervously, relief and terror warring in her expression. Denver sprawled before them, a proper city, with brick buildings and paved streets. They lodged at a respectable hotel where other women gradually arrived. Eleanor met them all. Victoria Chen, who'd worked in Prescott's household until fleeing his advances. Ruth Martinez, a seamstress who'd lost customers for refusing certain men. Dorothy Williams, a teacher fired for reporting inappropriate conduct. And 8 others, each with stories of power abused and justice denied. Thomas Whitman proved to be a thin, intense man with ink-stained fingers and sharp eyes. He listened to each woman with careful attention, taking copious notes. "This is explosive," he said after hours of testimony. "With documentation, witnesses, we can expose the whole corrupt system." "When do we see the governor?" Eleanor asked. "Tomorrow. He's cleared his afternoon." "But ladies..." Whitman's expression grew serious. "Once this story publishes, there'll be no going back. These men will fight dirty." "Let them," Eleanor said firmly. "We're done being afraid." That night, in their hotel room, Theodore held Eleanor close. "Proud of you," he murmured. "No, this isn't easy." "It's necessary." Eleanor traced patterns on his chest. "I kept thinking about other women facing what I faced. If speaking up saves even one." "It'll save more than one. You've started something here. Eleanor, something that matters. The next morning brought unexpected support. Charlotte Morrison arrived on the early train, accompanied by 6 more women ready to testify. The numbers grew beyond what anyone expected. The governor's mansion stood imposing in afternoon light. Eleanor led the group up the steps, chin high, Theodore beside her. Governor Crawford himself met them, a stern man with kind eyes who listened intently as Eleanor spoke for the group. She told it all: Prescott's pursuit, the attack, the sham trial. Other women added their voices, a chorus of truth too loud to ignore. Margaret Dalton's testimony about territorial courts protecting predators brought particular weight, her family name commanding respect. "I had no idea the corruption ran so deep," Governor Crawford said finally. "Judge Blackwood will be investigated immediately. As for these other men," he looked at his aide, "get me the Attorney General. We have work to do." The story broke in Whitman's paper 2 days later. Territory of Silence: How Powerful Men Weaponize Law Against Women. Eleanor's name appeared first, her story told in full. No hiding, no shame, just truth. The response was immediate. Some condemned the women as troublemakers, reputation destroyers, but more so, many more wrote in support. Women sharing their own stories, men expressing outrage at the corruption, citizens demanding reform. Judge Harrison Blackwood was arrested within a week, charged with judicial corruption. Other investigations followed. William Thornton fled the territory. 2 more judges resigned rather than face inquiry. But the greatest victory came in smaller moments. A young woman approaching Eleanor on the street, whispering, "Thank you for speaking up." A letter from a girl in Nebraska who'd found courage to report her own assault. The territorial legislature passing new protections for women testifying about attacks. 3 weeks after arriving in Denver, Eleanor stood with Theodore watching the sunrise from their hotel window. The work wasn't done, would never be truly done, but change was happening. "Ready to go home?" Theodore asked. Eleanor considered. Home, their little cabin in the mountains, their peaceful life. Part of her longed for it, but "I think we need to stay a bit longer," she said. "Harriet's organizing a group, women teaching other women their legal rights. I want to help establish it before we go." Theodore smiled. "Mary would have liked you. She believed in justice too. I would have liked her." Eleanor leaned into his warmth. "Theodore, thank you for standing by me through this." "Where else would I be?" A knock interrupted Harriet with morning newspapers. More editorials. More women finding voices. The avalanche Eleanor had started continued to grow. "Look at this," Harriet said excitedly. 3 more territories are investigating their courts. Eleanor, you've changed everything." "We changed everything," Eleanor corrected. "All of us, together. And Harriet." She met the girl's eyes. "I forgive you. Fully. Fear makes cowards of us all sometimes. What matters is finding courage eventually." Harriet burst into tears, hugging Eleanor fiercely, over her shoulder. Eleanor met Theodore's eyes, saw his pride and love shining there. Later, walking Denver's streets openly, scar displayed without shame, Eleanor marveled at the journey. From a terrified girl on an auction platform to a woman whose voice had shaken territorial power structures. From hidden to seen, silent to speaking, ashamed to proud. "No regrets?" Theodore asked, reading her mood as always. "None." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Well, one. I wish we'd brought the horses. City streets are no match for mountain trails." Theodore laughed. "Soon enough, though I have a feeling the mountains haven't seen the last of Eleanor Crow, crusader for justice." Eleanor smiled, thinking of their cabin, their garden, their quiet life, but also thinking of the work still to be done, the voices still to be raised. "The mountains will wait," she said. "They're patient like that." As they walked back to the hotel, planning their eventual return home, Eleanor noticed something different about the women they passed. Heads held higher, eyes meeting hers with recognition and resolve. The territory of silence was breaking apart, replaced by something stronger, the sound of truth spoken aloud, of women refusing to be silenced anymore. And at the heart of it, a woman with a scar who'd learned that the greatest power wasn't in hiding wounds, but in displaying them as proof of survival, badges of honor in the fight for dignity and justice. The story of Eleanor Crowe. The victim was ending. The story of Eleanor Crowe, the voice for the voiceless, had just begun. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 7. Rebirth. Love chosen, asterisk, asterisk. May brought them home to the mountains, where spring had exploded in their absence. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows. Indian paintbrush, columbine, and lupine painting the world in celebration. Eleanor stood in her garden, hands deep in soil, marveling at the seeds she'd planted that had grown without her tending. Life finds a way, she murmured, thinking of more than vegetables. Theodore appeared with lumber balanced on his shoulder. Samuel's boys kept it watered. Good neighbors are worth their weight in gold. They'd been home a week, readjusting to mountain rhythms after the intensity of Denver. Letters arrived daily, women writing to thank Eleanor, newspapers requesting interviews, even a note from Governor Crawford updating her on judicial reforms. But here, with dirt under her fingernails and sun on her face, Eleanor felt most truly herself. That evening, as they sat reading letters by lamplight, Theodore handed her a small package. This came while you were in the garden, from Charlotte Morrison. Eleanor unwrapped it carefully, gasping at what lay inside. A delicate silk scarf, ivory with pale blue flowers embroidered along the edges. The accompanying note read, "Dear Eleanor, this belonged to my grandmother, who came west in 1849 with nothing but courage. She used to say that we choose what covers us, shame or grace. You've chosen grace. Wear this when you're ready to show the world not just your scars, but your beauty. With love and admiration. Charlotte." Eleanor held the gossamer fabric to the light, tears pricking her eyes. "It's beautiful. Try it on," Theodore suggested gently. Eleanor moved to the mirror, the same one where she'd first removed her mask months ago. She draped the scarf around her shoulders, then, with sudden decision, wrapped it loosely around her hair like a veil. The soft fabric framed her face, drawing attention not to her scar but to her eyes, bright with life. "How do I look?" Theodore stood behind her, hands on her shoulders, like a woman who's chosen herself. That night, lying beside each other in the bed they now openly shared, Eleanor traced patterns on Theodore's chest. "I've been thinking about Mary's things, her brush, her clothes in the trunk." Theodore tensed slightly. "What about them?" "I'd like to use them, not to replace her, but to honor her, I suppose. Give them life again." Eleanor propped herself on an elbow. "Would that be all right?" Theodore was quiet for a long moment, then pulled her close. She'd like that. Mary believed in things being useful, not enshrined. And Eleanor, he tilted her chin up. "You don't replace her. You exist alongside her. Two different loves in one lifetime. Man's lucky to have one true love. I've been blessed with two." Eleanor kissed him softly, tasting tears, his or hers. She wasn't sure. They held each other as the night deepened. Two people who'd learned that hearts could break and still expand, that love wasn't diminished by sharing space with ghosts. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A small wagon wound up the trail, carrying 3 women Eleanor recognized from Denver: Dorothy Williams, the fired teacher, along with 2 younger women looking nervous but determined. "Eleanor," Dorothy called out, "I hope you don't mind. These are my cousins, Clara and Josephine. They've come west looking for new starts. And I thought—" "You thought right," Eleanor said warmly, helping them down. "Come in. Have coffee. Tell me everything." Over the next hours, the story emerged. The cousins had fled difficult situations back East Clara from a father who tried to sell her in marriage to clear debts. Josephine from an employer who'd made advances. They'd heard about Eleanor's stand, found courage to seek their own freedom. "We can work," Clara said earnestly. "No farming, cooking, anything needed. We just need a chance to start over." Eleanor exchanged glances with Theodore. The Dalton Ranch had mentioned needing help. The hotel in town always looked for workers. And these women, like Eleanor herself, just needed someone to believe in them. "Stay with us tonight," Eleanor decided. "Tomorrow, we'll ride to town together, see what opportunities we can find." That evening, with 5 around the dinner table, the cabin felt alive in new ways. The young women peppered Eleanor with questions about standing up to power, about finding courage, about building a life on her own terms. "It wasn't on my own," Eleanor corrected, smiling at Theodore. "None of us are truly alone. We just have to find our people." After the visitors bedded down in the barn loft, Eleanor stood on the porch, wrapped in Charlotte's scarf. Theodore joined her, pulling her back against his chest. "You're building something," he observed. "This network of women, helping each other." "We're building something," Eleanor corrected. "Your cabin's becoming a way station for women finding their feet." "Our cabin," Theodore said firmly, "and I'm proud to have it serve that purpose, though we might need to build an addition if this keeps up." Eleanor turned in his arms. "You really don't mind your peaceful mountain life keeps getting interrupted by crusading women." "My peaceful mountain life was too quiet anyway." Theodore traced her scar gently, a gesture that had become endearment rather than acknowledgement of injury. "Besides, watching you bloom into this force of nature worth any interruption." The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Clara found work at the Dalton Ranch, where Margaret took her under wing. Josephine was hired by the town's newspaper. Whitman's articles had inspired the local editor to seek a woman's perspective. Other women came through, some staying, some moving on, all carrying a bit of Eleanor's courage with them. One evening in late May, Eleanor sat brushing her hair with Mary's silver brush when she noticed Theodore watching from the doorway. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Just thinking how things change. 6 months ago, I was a hermit counting days. Now I'm living with the territory's most famous women's advocate." Eleanor set down the brush. "Is that what I am?" "Among other things." Theodore crossed to her. "You're also the woman who makes the best biscuits in 3 territories, who reads Shakespeare by firelight, who can shoot a rifle nearly as well as me." "Nearly?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Well, we can't all be sharpshooters." Theodore grinned, then grew serious. "Eleanor, these past months, watching you come into your own, find your voice, it's been like watching the sun rise after endless night." Eleanor stood, moved into his arms. "I couldn't have done it without you, without your patience, your faith in me." "You would have found your way regardless. I just had the privilege of witnessing it." Theodore pulled back, studying her face. "There's something I want to ask you." Eleanor's heart quickened. "What?" Instead of answering, Theodore led her outside. The evening was perfect warm breeze. First stars appearing, the mountains standing eternal guard. In the garden, Eleanor had coaxed back to life. He stopped beneath the apple tree just beginning to bud. "Mary and I planted this tree our first year here," he said. "Thought we'd watch it grow old, harvest apples for pies, maybe teach our children to climb it." Eleanor squeezed his hand, understanding the pain and hope in sharing this. "It nearly died when she passed. I couldn't tend it, couldn't bear to see it bloom without her." Theodore touched the new leaves gently. "But you brought it back, like you brought me back." He dropped to one knee, pulling out a simple gold ring. "Eleanor Crow, you've taught me that love isn't about possession or saving someone. It's about choosing each other every day, scars and all. Will you marry me?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She thought of the journey from that auction platform to this moment, all the fear and pain and growth between then and now. Thought of the man before her who'd seen her at her worst and called her beautiful, who'd stood beside her as she found her voice. "Theodore Morgan," she said, dropping to her knees before him, taking his face in her hands. "You bought my freedom for 50 cents and gave me back my life. You showed me that strength could be gentle, that love could be patient. Yes, I'll marry you. Today, tomorrow, forever." They kissed beneath the apple tree. Two people who'd learned that love wasn't about being unbroken, but about choosing each other because of the breaks, not despite them. When they finally stood, Theodore slipped the ring onto Eleanor's finger. It was slightly worn. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "Survived the journey west, Indian attacks, floods. Seemed fitting for a woman who's survived her own battles." That night, they made plans. A simple wedding, just friends and chosen family. Nothing grand. Eleanor had learned that the most profound moments often came without fanfare. "We could have it here," Theodore suggested. "In the meadow, with the mountains as witness." "Perfect." Eleanor leaned against him. "Theodore, that phrase you said so long ago, careful, angel. Once I'm yours, I stay forever. Did you know even then?" "Maybe not know," Theodore admitted. "But hope yes, something in your eyes that day, even frightened and masked. I hoped." Eleanor smiled, touching her scar, no longer a mark of shame, but a reminder of strength. "And the other part, what I said in the storm. Touch me there, I'm yours," Theodore quoted softly. "Bravest words I ever heard. Claiming yourself, your scars, your right to be touched with love instead of violence." They sat in comfortable silence, planning a future neither would have imagined months ago. The cabin that had sheltered Theodore's grief would now house their joy. The garden Eleanor had revived would feed not just them, but the women who'd continue to find refuge here. "No regrets?" Theodore asked, echoing his question from Denver. "Only one," Eleanor said, then laughed at his concerned look. "I wish we'd met differently. Wish you could have known Grace Fletcher before she became Eleanor Crow." "I know her," Theodore said firmly. "She's there in your kindness to scared young women, in your patience with growing things, in the way you still check the horizon before fully relaxing. Grace Fletcher didn't die in that boarding house she transformed, and I love every version of you." Eleanor kissed him, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more women seeking help, more fights for justice. But tonight, she was simply a woman who'd chosen love and been chosen in return. The stars wheeled overhead. The mountains stood eternal. And in a small cabin where loneliness had once lived, two people prepared for a lifetime of choosing each other, again and again, with all their scars displayed like medals of honor in the beautiful battles they'd survived. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 10. The end, from veil to wedding veil. Asterisk, asterisk. June arrived, dressed in mountain glory meadows thick with wildflowers, aspens whispering secrets, the air sweet with pine and possibility. Eleanor stood in her bedroom, Charlotte Morrison and Harriet Sullivan fussing around her like mother hens. "Hold still," Charlotte commanded, pinning another wildflower into Eleanor's hair. You'd think a woman who faced down corrupt judges could stand still for her own wedding. Eleanor laughed, joy bubbling up irrepressibly. Those judges didn't stick pins near my head. Through the window, she could see the meadow transformed. Theodore and the Dalton boys had built an arbor of pine boughs and wildflowers. Simple benches made from split logs accommodated their small gathering true friends who'd stood by them through storm and trial. "It's time," Harriet said softly, adjusting Eleanor's dress, a simple white cotton decorated with Charlotte's delicate embroidery. You look beautiful. Eleanor turned to the mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The scar still marked her face, but it seemed somehow softer. Just another part of her story. Charlotte's ivory scarf, the one that had replaced her mask of shame, now served as her wedding veil, pinned with Mary's silver hair combs that Theodore had offered with tears in his eyes. "I'm ready," Eleanor said, meaning more than just for the ceremony. Samuel Dalton waited to escort her, having claimed that honor with gruff insistence. "You gave my Margaret back her voice," he'd said. "Least I can do is walk you to your man." As they stepped onto the porch, Eleanor saw Theodore waiting beneath the arbor, Marshal Patterson beside him as best man. Theodore wore his best suit, but it was his face that caught her wonder and love written in every line. The small gathering stood as she approached the Daltons. Several women from Denver who'd made the journey. Sheriff Watson, who'd found his conscience. Even Thomas Whitman with his ever-present notebook tucked away for once. But Eleanor had eyes only for Theodore, who looked at her like she was sunrise after endless night. "You came," she whispered when she reached him. "Where else would I be?" he replied, echoing words from a night of storms. Marshal Patterson, who'd obtained the authority to officiate, cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we gather here in God's own cathedral to witness something I thought I'd never see Theodore Morgan choosing joy again, and Eleanor Crowe claiming love without fear." The ceremony was simple, their vows their own. Theodore spoke first, his voice rough with emotion. "Eleanor, you walked into my life masked and afraid, carrying wounds I recognized. But instead of letting pain define you, you transformed it into purpose. You brought light to my darkness, laughter to my silence, and taught me that broken doesn't mean worthless. I promise to stand beside you, not as protector, but as partner, through whatever storms may come." Eleanor's voice rang clear across the meadow. "Theodore, you saw past my mask to the woman beneath, called my scars beautiful, and gave me space to become myself. You taught me that love isn't possession but patient choice, made new each day. I promise to choose you, again and again, to build a life where our wounds become windows for light to enter." When Patterson pronounced them married, when Theodore kissed his bride beneath the mountain sky, the gathering erupted in celebration. But it was Margaret Dalton who provided the moment Eleanor would treasure forever. Stepping forward with a wrapped bundle, Margaret smiled. "A wedding gift from the women you've helped find their voices." Eleanor unwrapped it carefully, gasping at what lay within. A quilt, each square made by different hands, telling stories in fabric. Here, a sunrise over mountains. There, a woman breaking chains. Apple blossoms, books, scales of justice, symbols of journey from shadow into light. "We each made a square," Harriet explained. "To remember, to honor, to promise we won't forget what you taught us." Eleanor traced the careful stitches through tears. "It's perfect." The celebration continued into evening simple food. Samuel's fiddle, dancing on grass still damp with dew. Eleanor danced with Theodore, with Samuel, even with Sheriff Watson, who apologized again for his past blindness. As sunset painted the mountains gold, Clara, the young woman who'd fled an unwanted marriage, approached shyly. "Mrs. Morgan, I mean. Eleanor, could I speak with you?" Eleanor drew her aside, concerned. "What is it?" "I've had a letter from my sister back east. She's in trouble, same as I was. I want to help her, but I'm scared." Eleanor took the girl's hands. "Fear's natural, but you know what's stronger than fear." "What?" "Love. Love for your sister, for yourself, for the life you deserve." Eleanor squeezed gently. "Bring her here. We'll figure it out together." Clara hugged her impulsively. "Thank you for everything, for showing us we don't have to accept what others choose for us." As Clara rejoined the celebration, Theodore appeared at Eleanor's elbow. Building your army of brave women? Our army, Eleanor corrected. This cabin's going to need that addition you mentioned. Already drew up plans, Theodore admitted. Figured we'd need room for visitors, maybe eventually. Other reasons for needing space. Eleanor's hand drifted to her stomach, wondering. They'd not spoken of children yet, but the possibility hung between them like morning mist, delicate, hopeful. As the party wound down, guests departing with lanterns to light their way, Eleanor and Theodore found themselves alone beneath the stars. The arbor still stood, flowers beginning to close for the night. No regrets, Theodore asked, their traditional question. None, Eleanor said firmly. Then, with a mischievous smile, well, one. Theodore raised an eyebrow, concerned. I wish we'd kept that bill of sale from the auction. Would have been fitting to burn it tonight. Destroy the last symbol of ownership. Theodore's smile turned mysterious. Wait here. He returned from the cabin with a wooden box. Eleanor recognized his memory box, where he kept Mary's letters and important papers. From it, he withdrew a familiar crumpled document. You kept it, Eleanor was amazed. Thought we might need it for legal purposes, but you're right, tonight's the night to let it go. Together, they built a small fire near the arbor. Eleanor took the paper that had once reduced her to property, that had marked the lowest point of her journey. She looked at it one last time, the ugly words. The price of 50 cents. The signatures of men who thought they could own human dignity. Then she dropped it into the flames. They watched it burn, edges curling, words disappearing into ash. With it went Grace Fletcher's shame, Eleanor Crow's fear, the last chain binding her to that terrible night in Silverton. Free, she whispered. Free, Theodore agreed, pulling her close. They stood watching the fire die to embers, then walked hand in hand to their cabin, not his anymore, but theirs. The quilt made by grateful women lay across their bed. Mary's brush sat beside Eleanor's new treasures on the dresser. 2 lives, intertwined without erasing what came before. That night, as they lay together as husband and wife, Eleanor traced the scar on Theodore's shoulder from his war wound. We match, she said softly. Both marked by violence, healed by love. Difference is, Theodore murmured against her hair. Your scar came from fighting for yourself. That takes a different kind of courage. All courage is the same. Eleanor disagreed. It's moving forward when everything in you wants to stop. Outside, a mountain storm rolled in, not violent like the blizzard that had revealed her scar, but gentle summer rain that would water her garden, feed the streams, bring new life. Eleanor listened to it on the roof, safe in Theodore's arms, and marveled at the journey. From auction block to wedding arbor, from mask to veil to freedom, from silence to voice to chorus. As more women found strength in shared truth, the woman who'd hidden her face now showed it proudly. Scar and all, the man who'd grieved alone now opened his home to healing. Theodore, Eleanor said into the darkness. Thank you for seeing me. Really seeing me from the beginning. Thank you for letting yourself be seen. The rain continued its gentle song. In the barn, Clara slept peacefully, soon to be joined by her sister. In Denver, Governor Crawford drafted new protections for women, influenced by Eleanor's testimony. Across 3 territories, women looked at their own scars and thought perhaps they too could claim them as strength. And in a cabin built by love and loss, expanded by hope and purpose, Theodore and Eleanor Morgan began their married life not perfect, not without shadows, but chosen, deliberately, joyfully chosen. The mountains stood eternal guard. Having witnessed another truth as old as their stones, love doesn't erase wounds, but transforms them into doors where light enters. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that light is enough to illuminate not just your own path, but to show others the way to their own freedom. In the morning, There would be coffee to make, gardens to tend, probably another woman seeking sanctuary. But tonight, there was just this two people who'd learned that the deepest love comes not from saving or being saved, but from choosing to heal together, one careful day at a time. The storm passed, stars emerged, and in the grateful darkness, love wrote its quiet victory over all the forces that had tried to break them. They had not broken. They had become. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Dear audience, I hope Eleanor and Theodore's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts about their story. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button so more people can discover these stories of courage, love, and redemption. Until next time, partners.